Chapter 3 of Tractate Sukkah deals with the next of the main obligations of the holiday of Sukkot, besides for the necessity to dwell, eat, and drink in a sukkah, which is that of the 4 species. The verse says, "And you shall take for yourselves on the first day the fruit of a beautiful tree, the branches of date palms, and a shoot of a plaited tree, and brook willows, and ye shall rejoice before Hashem your God for a 7-day period." Traditionally, these 4 species refer in order to an Esrog, a citron, a Lulav, a date palm branch, a Hadas, a myrtle branch, and an Arava, willow branches. All 4 are required together without any missing. They're held together, a blessing is said over them on the holiday of Sukkot, and they're shaken in every direction. The first Mishnah says, in regards to the Lulav, the palm frond, you cannot use a stolen one, or a dry one, or one from an Asherah tree, a tree worshipped for idolatry, or one from a city where most of its inhabitants worship idols. It's also invalidated if its top is clipped off, or if its leaves were torn. If the leaves were separated, it's valid. Rabbi Yehuda says you should tie them together at the top. Palms from the Iron Mountains, which grow much shorter leaves, are still valid. It's still valid if its length is 3 handbreadths, which is long enough to wave it. The Gemara says obviously a dried lulav is not allowed the whole sukkah, as it's not beautiful. And a stolen lulav is not allowed as it was brought from a transgression. This is sourced from the impermissibility of offering a stolen offering, even though its owner abandoned it. Others say the prohibition against using a stolen lulav is only by the first day of the holiday, as you're also allowed to use a borrowed lulav by the remaining days. This is disputed. Similarly, it mentions that if you're going to buy the myrtle branches from an idol worshipper, you should have them cut the branches and give them to you, as if you take it yourself, it might be that they stole the land and you're getting an illegal acquisition. There's no issue with the land itself being stolen, as people don't abandon their ownership, but they could steal the trees, so you need them to give it to you. Some say that you're not getting ownership over the myrtle by making a physical change when it's bundled as part of the lulav, either as some hold you don't physically bundle the lulav together, while others say it's not considered a physical change to bundle it, as it could just be unbundled. This is discussed. There's debate if you can use a stolen or public sukkah. Some say you can't use a borrowed sukkah anyways, and if land is stealable, then it's stolen. While others say, yeah, if you can steal land, it's stolen and impermissible, but if you hold that land is not stealable, you're basically legally just borrowing the sukkah, which according to him is valid. Both agree that stealing wood to build a sukkah does actually make a legally valid sukkah, although obviously you would need to return the value of the wood. There are a few related cases brought. Once a stolen beam was built into a sukkah, you have to pay the beam's value rather than demolish the whole sukkah, so long as it's still sukkahs. Afterwards, you need to return the actual beam, unless it was sealed with cement, in which case you'd give its value. There's actually debate if a lulav is valid if it's dry, based on if we compare it to an esrog, which basically everybody agrees must be a beautiful fruit. These points are further discussed. The same way you cannot have less than the 4 species, you cannot have more, even if they're bundled separately. You cannot replace an esrog with any fruit in case people get accustomed to that. Some actually don't require the esrog to be beautiful, as they say you can use an old one, albeit not an underdeveloped one. This is further discussed. The issue with the lulav from an idolatrous Asherah tree was an Asherah tree from the times of Moshe, which was required to be burnt, so it's not valid, as it's considered to be destroyed, similar to if it's from a majority idolatrous city. The lulav is invalid if its top is clipped off, not if it's split. That's if its leaves or spine are split. It's not valid if it grew into a Y shape. It's also invalid if it's curved forward, as opposed to backwards. There's debate where being curved sideways falls on this. If the lulav only has leaves on one side of its spine, it's invalid. It's invalid if its leaves are torn, which means ripped off and reattached like a broom, or separated, meaning spread apart. If the lulav tip of the spine is removed or split, it's invalid. There's discussion on sources in regards to the opinion that the lulav must be tied shut at the top. The lulav from the Iron Mountains are permissible so long as the leaves are long enough to reach the base of the next leaf. This is debated, and it also mentions that these palms are on the valley of Ben Hinnom, where smoke rises between them, and it's an entrance to Gehenna. Some say the myrtle and willow branches must be 3 handbreadths, while the lulav must be 4, so it's a handbreadth higher. This is discussed further. New Mishnah. A stolen or dry hadas, myrtle, is invalid, as is one from an idolatrous Asherah tree or from a majority idolatrous city. It's also invalid if its top is clipped off, if its leaves are torn, or if there are more berries than leaves. You can decrease the berries to make it valid, although you can't do that on a holiday. The Gemara explains the verse and how it refers specifically to a myrtle branch. It also says the leaves must be plaited for it to be valid, either each leaf cluster having 3 leaves at the base, or 2 with 1 leaf overlapping pairs. It can still have majority of the leaves fall off if there are very thick clusters of 7 leaves, so that way there are still 3 remaining. This is discussed. It mentions that if the top of the lulav was clipped off but a bud grew there, it's valid. There's a question if it's allowed if the bud grew on over the holiday. This is further discussed. Some say where it's invalidated due to majority berries. This is only if the berries are in one spot. Some say it's only that it's invalid if the berries are black or red. Some say it's permissible to remove the berries even after, when it was bundled to the lulav, as they say that the bundling is just to designate it for the mitzvah, so it's not yet rejected due to its unfitness. We said you can't remove the berries on the holiday, but if you did, it's valid, meaning the cases where they turned black before the holiday, meaning you can't learn anything from this in regards to where the article was originally fit and valid for use but then became rejected, if you can still fix and use it by other laws. This is further discussed. It also says if your lulav bundle gets undone on the holiday, you can't tie a knot. So some say to just wrap a strap around it and tuck it in, meaning they disagree with the opinion that you can make a bow knot on a holiday, and they disagree with the opinion that the lulav needs to be tied with a proper knot. New Mishnah. A stolen or dry arava willow is invalid, as is one from an idolatrous Asherah tree or from a majority idolatrous city. It's also invalid if the top was clipped off, its leaves were torn, or if its leaves were round. If it's withered, if a portion of its leaves fell off, or if it's from a field, it's still valid. The Gemara cites sources, specifically that it should be a brook willow, but based on verses, even field willows work. This is all discussed further. There are also physical descriptions of a valid willow, and points on the definition of several words. New Mishnah. You take 3 hadassim myrtle, 2 araves willows, 1 lulav palm, and 1 esrog. The hadassim are valid even if only 2 are clipped. Some say they're valid if all are clipped. Some say you only need 1 of each. The Gemara discusses these points. It says we follow the opinion that all of the hadassim can be clipped. The last opinion is actually stricter, as 1 unclipped myrtle is rarer than 3 clipped ones. New Mishnah. A stolen or dry esrog is invalid, as is one from an idolatrous Asherah tree or from a majority idolatrous city. It's also invalid if it's from a within 3-year-old tree, or if it's of teruma tithes which are impure. If it's of pure teruma, you shouldn't use it, but if you did, it's valid. There's debate if it can be from questionably tithed produce. If it's from Meiser Sheni tithes within Jerusalem, it's better not to, but it's valid if you did use it. If there's a defect on the esrog, like boils over majority, or it's pitum, this part over here, was removed, or it's peeled, or split open, or punctured with a piece missing, it's invalid. It's valid if the boils are on the minority, if the stem is missing, or it was punctured, but no piece is missing. An Ethiopian esrog is invalid. There is debate if a leek green esrog is permitted. The smallest possible size of a valid esrog is debated, either a walnut or the size of an egg. The largest, some say that 2 of it can be held in one hand, others say that there is no maximum size. The Gemara cites sources for these points. Again, it cannot be from an Asherah tree, which would be destroyed, as would be the esrog. There's debate over why a 3-year-old tree esrog is invalid. Some say because those fruits can't be eaten. Some say because it has no monetary jurisdiction. This is discussed. The points on tithes are also qualified. This is discussed further along with the logics. For instance, some would allow using an esrog from questionably tithed produce, as you could in theory give up all of your ownership of all your property, thus legally making yourself a pauper, which is permitted to have questionably tithed produce. Others say that a pauper is not allowed to eat questionably tithed produce, so they would disagree. These points are further discussed along with further definition of the blemishes. These are discussed further. There are additional points, like you can't use an esrog that was shaped in a mold to an off shape, like with spokes that poke out of it, or if a mice ate of it, which is gross, unlike by a person eating it, although that possibly was only done on the 2nd day of the holiday in that case, and after. In regards to the minimum sizes of the esrog, there's a similar debate about the sizes of stones you can bring into a restroom on Shabbos. It also mentions that once Rabbi Akiva showed up to a synagogue with an esrog so large that he had to carry it in on his shoulders, but it was invalidated as it wasn't considered to be beautiful. New Mishnah. Some say you have to bind the lulav with similar plants. Others say you can even use linen thread. Some people in Jerusalem would bind their lulav with gold thread, but they would also use the plant fibers too. The Gemara defines which parts of the palm tree can be used, even with the palm ivy, or with strips of bark from the palm. He doesn't allow other substances, as he says it must be only of the 4 species. This is discussed. We bring sources for these points, and the other points are also qualified. There are other points. Some say not to poke the lulav down into the bundle, which will tear off some leaves and create interposition, but others say that's not interposition, as it's of the same species. There are similar points. It also says that some hold you can't smell the myrtle in the lulav, as it's typically used for smelling, and it's been designated for a mitzvah, while a lulav can be smelled, as it's normally designated for eating. However, normally on a typical Shabbos, you would be allowed to smell a myrtle attached to a tree, as you won't cut it off, but you can't smell an esrog attached to a tree, as you might end up cutting it off. Also, you hold the lulav in the right hand, as it has 3 of the parts of the mitzvah, and the esrog in the left hand, as that's just 1. We also just mentioned the lulav in the blessing, as it's the tallest of all the species. New Mishnah, the lulav is waved during the Hodu verses of the Hallel prayer, and by the Ana Hashem verses. Some say also over here. Some only wave their lulav over here. The Gemara says the context is that the last Mishnah mentioned waving the lulav in regards to context of its length. It also explains how they're waved in every direction. For instance, as it's done by certain Shavuos offerings, they are either to demonstrate that the world is God's, or according to others, as a prayer of sorts for good wind and dew. So the same is done by the lulav. One sage would wave the lulav and say that it's an arrow in the eye of Satan, but we shouldn't do that because then Satan might get provoked and focus on you to try to get you to sin. New Mishnah, if someone was traveling and they didn't have a lulav to do the mitzvah with, he should do it right when he gets home. If you didn't do lulav in the morning, you can still do it the rest of the day. The Gemara says that he needs to do it right away if there's not enough time to finish the meal before night will fall. This point is further discussed. New Mishnah, if a slave, woman, or minor are saying the Hallel prayer for somebody, they should repeat after them. And it's a very non-admirable situation for somebody to be so unlearned. If a male adult says Hallel for someone, he should repeat only the Hallelujah after the verses. The Hallel prayer is said according to the local custom. The Gemara mentions similar points, like that it's improper for a person to have his wife or kids say their after blessings for him. It also lists the custom as to the exact wording of the Hallel prayer as it said. Some say that if you listen to somebody recite a text and you don't respond, you've still fulfilled your obligation based off some verses. There are further points on the proper reading of the Hallel prayer. These are further discussed. New Mishnah, during the sabbatical year, once every 7 years, where the crops cannot be farmed, if you purchase a lulav from someone ignorant, you should also have him give you the esrog as a gift, as you can't purchase it during the year. The Gemara says if the guy doesn't want to give it to you as a gift, you include the cost as part of the lulav. You can't just buy the esrog, as buying Shemitah produce from this year has the money attain a special status that it must be spent during this year, and the concern is that the ignorant individual will keep it until after, and we bring sources. The lulav in question is permissible to buy, as this lulav in question was one that was grown during the 6th year, before the Shemitah year, while the esrog goes according to the date that it was picked. This is debated. These points are discussed further. It further qualifies points on the sanctity of Shemitah sabbatical year produce. This goes on for a bit. New Mishnah. By the temple, the lulav and esrog were taken into the temple all days of Sukkah, and everywhere else it was just by the first day. But after the temple was destroyed, it was instituted by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to shake the lulav all 7 days of the holiday in commemoration. And similarly, by the day of the waving of the barley offering on the 2nd day of the holiday of Passover, they would not eat any of the new crop of grain. The Gemara cites verses as sources. These institutions were made as Mashiach could come at any moment and the temple could be rebuilt, and we don't want anybody to make any mistakes based on what they did in prior years. This is more precisely qualified, and this is discussed further. New Mishnah. If the first day of Sukkot falls out on a Shabbos, you don't shake the lulav and esrog. However, that was done in the times of the temple on Shabbos. So everybody would bring the lulav to the synagogue on Friday, and then they would make sure they got their correct ones on the Shabbos. As on the first day of Sukkot, you have to use your own lulav. If Shabbos was the first day of Sukkot, and you forgot it was Shabbos, so you carry your lulav in a public domain, which is not allowed, you're not liable as it was to do a mitzvah. The Gemara cites verses as sources for these points, and they're discussed. This is all further qualified. New Mishnah. A woman can take the lulav back from her son or husband and put it in water on Shabbos so it won't wilt. Some say you can actually add water on the holiday, and on the intermediate days of the holiday you can change the water. A minor who knows how to shake the lulav is obligated to do so. The Gemara says it mentions a woman doing this to clarify that it's not muktzah, impermissible, for her to touch on Shabbos, even though she's exempt from the commandment of lulav. It also says that a minor who knows how to wear tzitzis is obligated to do so. If he knows how to guard the sanctity of tefillin, his father should buy him tefillin, and if he knows how to talk, he should be taught Torah and how to say Shema. Torah here is the verse Torah Tzivilanu Moshe, and Shema is just the first verse of the Shema. There are other things in regards to laws of purity. For instance, if a minor knows how to deal with, he's obligated within them. It even says that if a minor knows how to slaughter an animal, that's permissible, as long as it's done with supervision. Also, you can have the paschal offering for a minor if he can eat an olive's volume of it, or according to some, if he can differentiate between edible and inedible food. And that's the end of chapter 3.